Welcome to our channel. Before starting, please like and subscribe for more stories. In Medellin, Colombia, a young black boy named Samuel, only 12 years old, found himself at the center of a legal battle that would change his life forever. Known in his community as a kind and hardworking child, Samuel lived with his grandmother, Dona Marta, in a modest house in a poor neighborhood. His mother had left years earlier in search of better opportunities, leaving Samuel in the loving care of his grandmother, who raised him with strong values. One day, Samuel's life took a dramatic turn. While he was selling fruit on the street corner as he did every afternoon, a group of police officers suddenly stopped him. They accused him of participating in a robbery that had occurred earlier that day at a nearby store. Despite Samuel's protests and insistence on his innocence, the police officers didn't believe him. One officer, in particular, Officer Ramirez, claimed to have seen Samuel near the store shortly after the crime. Without further investigation, they took Samuel into custody. The news of Samuel's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors and friends gathered outside the police station, demanding answers and calling for his release. "Samuel is just a child, and he's innocent," they shouted. Dona Marta, devastated and in tears, went to the police station to plead for her grandson. "My Samuel is not a thief. He's a good boy who works hard to help me," she cried. However, her pleas fell on deaf ears, and the officers refused to release him. The next day, Samuel was formally charged with aggravated robbery based solely on the testimony of Officer Ramirez. The police alleged that Samuel had fled the scene carrying stolen goods. Even though there was no physical evidence linking Samuel to the crime, his status as a poor black child in Medellin made him an easy target for blame. He was placed in juvenile detention while awaiting trial, a place far removed from the safety of his grandmother's home. Meanwhile, Dona Marta sought help wherever she could find it. With the support of neighbors, she managed to hire a local defense attorney named Mr. Herrera. Known for taking on cases of injustice, Herrera reviewed Samuel's case and was outraged by the lack of evidence. "This is a clear case of racial and social bias," he said. "We will fight to prove his innocence." The courtroom was packed when Samuel's trial began. Supporters from the neighborhood, journalists, and curious onlookers filled the benches. Samuel, dressed in the cleanest clothes his grandmother could find, sat quietly next to his lawyer, looking anxious but determined. The judge, an older man with a stern demeanor, opened the trial with a loud bang of his gavel. The prosecutor, relying on the testimony of Officer Ramirez, painted Samuel as a criminal. "The officer's identification of the accused is sufficient evidence to establish his guilt," declared the prosecutor. As the trial progressed, Samuel's defense focused on exposing inconsistencies in the officer's testimony. Mr. Herrera presented receipts showing that Samuel was purchasing fruit at a local market during the time of the robbery. He also pointed out that no stolen goods were ever recovered from Samuel. Despite these efforts, the judge seemed skeptical, and the atmosphere in the courtroom remained tense. The trial had reached a critical juncture. The prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of Officer Ramirez, who confidently stated that he had seen Samuel near the scene of the robbery carrying a suspicious bag. The prosecutor reiterated this point, emphasizing that an officer's account should be considered credible evidence. "The accused was identified by a respected law enforcement officer," the prosecutor declared. "This is not a case of mistaken identity." Samuel sat quietly, his small frame dwarfed by the courtroom's imposing wooden benches. Though he felt the weight of the accusations against him, he clung to the truth and the values instilled in him by his grandmother. Mr. Herrera, his defense lawyer, watched closely, noting the cracks beginning to form in the officer's story. When it was Samuel's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. The boy stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the witness stand. Despite his fear, Samuel met the judge's gaze and spoke with a voice steadier than he thought possible. "I didn't do anything wrong, Your Honor," he said. "I was selling fruit that day, like I always do, to help my grandmother." The prosecutor, sensing the impact of Samuel's words on the audience, attempted to discredit him. "You're just a child," he sneered. "How can we trust your word over that of an experienced officer?" Samuel hesitated for a moment, then straightened his back. "Because I am telling the truth," he replied, his voice firm. The defense then introduced a key witness, Luis, the 13-year-old boy who had been with Samuel on the day of the robbery. Luis was called to the stand and confirmed Samuel's alibi. "We were together the whole time, selling fruit on the corner," Luis said. "We didn't leave, not even for a minute." His testimony was clear and consistent, but the prosecutor dismissed it as biased, claiming that Luis was simply covering for his friend. What happened next changed the course of the trial. Mr. Herrera began cross-examining Officer Ramirez, pressing him on the details of his testimony. "Officer, you claim you saw Samuel near the store with a bag. Can you describe exactly what he was wearing that day?" Herrera asked. Ramirez hesitated, his confident demeanor faltering. "He was wearing a red shirt and jeans," he replied. Samuel's lawyer seized the moment. "That's interesting because my client was wearing a white shirt and black pants that day. We have witnesses who can confirm this, including his grandmother and neighbors who saw him before and after the alleged crime." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Ramirez's credibility began to crumble. Sensing that the momentum was shifting, the prosecutor attempted to redirect attention to the alleged stolen items. "Even if the clothing details are unclear, the fact remains that the accused matches the description of the suspect," he argued. But Herrera wasn't finished. He presented a crucial piece of evidence, a receipt showing that Samuel had purchased fruit at a local market just minutes before the robbery occurred. The timing made it impossible for him to have been at the scene of the crime. The judge, visibly intrigued by the new evidence, called for a brief recess to review the documents. As the courtroom emptied, Samuel returned to his seat beside his grandmother. Dona Marta placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're doing so well, mi niño," she whispered. "The truth is on your side." After the recess, the courtroom reconvened, buzzing with anticipation. The weight of the new evidence had shifted the atmosphere. Samuel sat beside his lawyer, still nervous but slightly more hopeful. The receipt proving his whereabouts at the time of the robbery was a crucial piece of evidence, but there was still much to be resolved. His grandmother, Dona Marta, sat in the front row, clutching her hands tightly as if her prayers could guide the truth to prevail. The judge, now visibly more engaged, called the court to order. His tone was firm as he addressed both the prosecution and the defense. "The evidence presented has raised questions about the credibility of the testimony provided by Officer Ramirez," he began. "This court will require further clarification before proceeding." Mr. Herrera, seizing the opportunity, requested that the court allow the review of surveillance footage from the area around the store. "Your Honor, there are multiple cameras near the scene of the alleged crime. If we can access the footage, we may be able to definitively confirm my client's innocence," Herrera argued. The prosecutor initially resisted, stating that the footage might not be relevant, but the judge overruled his objections. "This court seeks the truth above all else. The footage will be retrieved and reviewed." The revelation in the footage. The footage was obtained from a camera mounted on a lamppost near the store. Everyone in the courtroom watched intently as the video played on a large screen. The prosecutor's confidence visibly faltered as the recording began to contradict their narrative. In the footage, a young boy could be seen running out of the store carrying a bag, but it was not Samuel. The boy in the video was slightly older, with a taller frame and different clothing. He wore a red shirt and jeans, exactly the description Officer Ramirez had given. The defense quickly paused the video, and Herrera addressed the court. "Your Honor, this footage clearly shows that the person fleeing the scene is not my client. Not only does this prove Samuel's innocence, but it also raises serious questions about why Officer Ramirez identified him as the suspect." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and the judge had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. The prosecutor attempted to salvage the case, arguing that the footage didn't entirely exonerate Samuel, as it didn't account for his whereabouts before or after the robbery. However, Herrera was prepared for this line of attack. He presented a second piece of footage, this one from a camera near the fruit stand where Samuel and Luis were selling their goods that day. The second video confirmed Luis's testimony. Samuel had been at the fruit stand during the entire time the robbery took place. The footage showed him interacting with customers, arranging fruit, and chatting with Luis. There was no indication that he had left the corner at any point. Officer Ramirez's credibility crumbles. With the video evidence stacked against him, Officer Ramirez was called back to the stand for further questioning. Mr. Herrera's tone was sharp but professional as he began his cross-examination. Officer Ramirez, can you explain why you were so certain that my client was the suspect when the footage clearly shows someone else committing the crime? Ramirez, who had been confident and composed at the beginning of the trial, now looked visibly uncomfortable. It was a chaotic situation, he stammered. I made a mistake, but I believe I was acting in good faith. Herrera pressed further. A mistake? Or negligence? Your testimony nearly ruined the life of an innocent child. Why didn't you verify your claim before accusing Samuel? The courtroom was silent, save for the scribbling of reporters' pens as they documented every word. Ramirez struggled to respond, his credibility in tatters. Finally, he admitted that he had made an assumption based on Samuel's presence in the area and his appearance. He matched the general description, Ramirez muttered, avoiding eye contact with the judge. Herrera didn't let up. General description? Or was it easier to accuse a poor black boy selling fruit on the street rather than conducting a thorough investigation? This is not just a mistake, Your Honor. It's a failure of justice. The judge takes a stand. The judge, who had remained composed throughout the proceedings, now addressed the courtroom with a solemn expression. This court is deeply troubled by the revelations presented today, he said, his voice firm. The evidence clearly exonerates the accused. Furthermore, the actions of Officer Ramirez raise serious concerns about bias and negligence in this investigation. Turning to Samuel, the judge spoke directly to him for the first time. Young man, the justice system has failed you. On behalf of this court, I apologize for the ordeal you have endured. You have demonstrated remarkable courage in defending your truth, and I commend you for it. Samuel, overwhelmed with emotion, nodded quietly. His grandmother, seated nearby, broke into tears of relief, her whispered prayers finally answered. A turning point. The prosecutor, realizing that the case was no longer salvageable, formally withdrew the charges against Samuel. The prosecution acknowledges that there is insufficient evidence to proceed with this case, he admitted, though his tone lacked the humility the situation warranted. The judge banged his gavel, declaring Samuel innocent and closing the trial. The courtroom erupted into applause, led by Samuel's neighbors and supporters who had gathered to witness the outcome. For Samuel, the sound was both overwhelming and affirming. He had fought for his freedom and won, proving his innocence against seemingly insurmountable odds. As Samuel stepped out of the courtroom into the bright Medellin sun, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters. Reporters rushed to capture his story, asking how he felt about the trial. Samuel, still processing the events, simply said, I told the truth. That's all I ever wanted to do. Samuel's victory in court was more than a personal triumph. It was a moment of awakening for his family, his community, and even the city of Medellin. The trial not only exposed the deep flaws in the justice system, but also highlighted the pervasive biases that marginalized communities often face. As Samuel stepped out of the courthouse, free from the weight of false accusations, the real journey of healing and rebuilding began, returning home as a hero. When Samuel and his grandmother, Dona Marta, returned to their humble neighborhood, they were met with an outpouring of love and support. Neighbors lined the streets to welcome them home, some holding handmade signs that read, Samuel es innocent and Justicia para todos. The scene was both celebratory and emotional. For many, Samuel's victory symbolized hope, a rare instance where truth and justice prevailed despite the odds. Dona Marta, overwhelmed by the kindness of her community, thanked everyone who had supported them during the ordeal. No podríamos haberlo hecho sin ustedes, she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. Mi nieto ha demostrado que la verdad siempre gana, pero también hemos aprendido que juntos somos más fuertes. Samuel, still processing everything that had happened, stood quietly by her side. Though he was relieved to be home, he couldn't shake the lingering feelings of fear and humiliation from his time in detention. Yet, as he looked around at the familiar faces of his neighbors, he began to feel a spark of resilience. They believed in him, and now it was his turn to believe in himself. The community speaks out. Samuel's case sparked conversations throughout the neighborhood about the systemic injustices that many of its residents face daily. Stories of wrongful arrests, racial profiling, and police misconduct began to surface. Inspired by Samuel's courage, neighbors organized a meeting at the local community center to discuss how they could advocate for change. During the meeting, Samuel's lawyer, Mr. Herrera, spoke passionately about the importance of knowing and exercising one's rights. What happened to Samuel is not an isolated incident, he said. It's a reflection of a system that often targets the most vulnerable. But we have the power to demand accountability and to protect ourselves through education. The attendees, including Samuel and Dona Marta, listened intently as Herrera outlined practical steps they could take, such as forming a neighborhood legal defense group and hosting workshops on legal rights. Inspired by the meeting, several residents volunteered to help organize the workshops, ensuring that everyone in the community would have access to the information they needed to protect themselves. Samuel, despite his young age, played an active role in these efforts. He shared his story during the workshops, speaking candidly about the fear and uncertainty he had felt during the trial. "I didn't know what was going to happen to me," he admitted to the group. "But I learned that even when it feels like no one is on your side, you have to stand up for the truth." Ramirez faces consequences. While Samuel was beginning to heal and rebuild his life, the repercussions of the trial were far from over for Officer Ramirez. The inconsistencies in his testimony and the lack of evidence in his investigation had come under scrutiny, prompting an internal review by the Medellin Police Department. As more details emerged, it became clear that Ramirez had a history of questionable practices, including targeting vulnerable individuals without substantial evidence. Human rights organizations and local activists called for Ramirez to be held accountable for his actions. A formal inquiry was launched, during which several past cases involving Ramirez were reopened. Some of these cases, much like Samuel's, involved accusations based on flimsy or fabricated evidence. After weeks of investigation, Ramirez was suspended from duty and eventually dismissed from the police force. Though he avoided criminal charges, his career was effectively over. For Samuel and his supporters, this was a small but significant victory. "This isn't just about one officer," Herrera reminded the community. "It's about holding the entire system accountable." Ramirez may be gone, but the fight for justice continues, healing and moving forward. For Samuel, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a long process of healing. His time in detention had left emotional scars, and he often woke up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of the cold, dark cell where he had spent weeks. Dona Marta, ever the pillar of strength, encouraged him to talk about his feelings. "Lo que paso no define quien eres, mi niño," she told him. "Eres fuerte valiente, y tienes un futuro brillante por delante." Samuel also found solace in his neighbors, many of whom went out of their way to support him. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Don Rafael, began tutoring Samuel in the afternoons, helping him catch up on the schoolwork he had missed. "You have a bright mind, Samuel," Don Rafael often said. "Don't let this experience hold you back. Use it to propel yourself forward." Slowly but surely, Samuel began to regain his confidence. He returned to school and threw himself into his studies, determined to prove to himself and others that he was more than the accusations that had been leveled against him. He also continued helping his grandmother with her small fruit-selling business, finding comfort in the familiar routine, becoming a voice for justice. Despite his young age, Samuel's experience had turned him into an unlikely advocate for justice. Local organizations invited him to share his story at events and workshops, where he inspired others to stand up for their rights. Samuel spoke with a quiet but undeniable conviction, his words carrying the weight of someone who had lived through an ordeal and emerged stronger. "I'm not the only one this has happened to," he said during one such event. "There are many others who don't have the support I had. We need to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Samuel's message resonated deeply, particularly with other young people from marginalized communities. He became a role model, not just for his courage during trial, but for his determination to use his experience to create positive change. Many of his peers began to see him as a leader, and they often sought his advice on how to handle their own challenges. A community transformed. Samuel's case had a lasting impact on his community. The workshops on legal rights became a regular event, empowering residents to stand up against injustice. A local organization even established a legal aid fund to help those who couldn't afford representation, ensuring that no one else would have to face the system alone. For Samuel, life slowly began to normalize, but he never forgot the lessons he had learned. He continued to excel in school, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. "I want to be a lawyer one day," he told Don Rafael during one of their tutoring sessions. "I want to help people who don't have anyone to fight for them." Samuel's victory in court and the transformation of his community planted the seeds for his next chapter, pursuing a dream of becoming an advocate for justice. The experience of defending himself and standing up for the truth had left an indelible mark on his young mind. He was determined to ensure that no other child would have to endure what he had, and he knew that education and perseverance would be the keys to achieving that goal. Finding purpose through education. After the trial, Samuel returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose. His teachers, aware of his ordeal, went out of their way to support him academically and emotionally. One of them, Mrs. Valeria, became a mentor to him, often staying after school to help him catch up on the work he had missed. "You have so much potential, Samuel," she would say. "Your experience doesn't define you. It empowers you." Samuel quickly excelled in his studies, particularly in subjects like history and social sciences. He found himself drawn to stories of people who had fought for justice, from leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. to figures closer to home, such as Colombian activists who had stood up against corruption and inequality. Inspired by these examples, Samuel began to see himself not just as a survivor of injustice, but as someone capable of making a difference. One day, while reading about a lawyer who had defended marginalized communities, Samuel turned to his grandmother and said, "Abuela, quiero ser abogado. Quiero ayudar a las personas que no pueden defender solas." Dona Marta, moved by his determination, replied, "Mi niño, siempre he sabido que harías cosas grandes. Tienes un corazón fuerte y un espíritu justo. Nunca dejes de soñar." A scholarship opportunity. Samuel's story had caught the attention of several organizations in Medellin, including a foundation dedicated to supporting young people from underserved communities. Recognizing his potential, the foundation offered Samuel a scholarship to attend a prestigious secondary school in the city center. The school, known for its rigorous academic program and focus on leadership development, was a world away from the modest classroom Samuel was used to. At first, Samuel hesitated to accept the scholarship. He worried about leaving his neighborhood and being surrounded by students from wealthier backgrounds who might not understand his struggles. "Why es I no encajo, abuela?" he asked one evening, his voice filled with doubt. But Dona Marta reassured him, saying, "Samuel, tu lugar es de donde puedas crecer y aprender. No importa de donde vengas, lo importante es hacia donde vas." Encouraged by her words, Samuel accepted the scholarship and began attending the new school. The transition was challenging at first. Many of his classmates came from affluent families, and Samuel sometimes felt out of place. However, his resilience and determination quickly earned him the respect of his peers and teachers. He became known as a thoughtful and hardworking student, always willing to help others and share his perspective. Leadership and advocacy. As Samuel settled into his new school, he began to explore opportunities to advocate for justice and equality. He joined the school's debate team, where he discovered a talent for crafting persuasive arguments and speaking with confidence. In one debate, Samuel passionately argued against racial profiling, drawing from his own experiences to make a compelling case. His team won the debate, and Samuel's performance was praised by students and teachers alike. Samuel also took part in student government, where he worked to create programs that connected the school with underserved communities. One of his initiatives was organizing a mentorship program in which older students tutored children from poorer neighborhoods. "Education is the first step to change," he told his classmates during a presentation. "When we help others learn, we're building a better future for everyone." Through these activities, Samuel began to see the impact of his efforts. Younger students looked up to him as a role model, and even his wealthier peers began to recognize the importance of addressing inequality. "You've taught us a lot, Samuel," one of his classmates said during a school assembly. "Not just about justice, but about resilience and hope." A growing reputation. Samuel's advocacy work, didn't go unnoticed outside the school. Local organizations invited him to speak at events and share his story, which inspired many to take action against injustice. At one event, a journalist asked Samuel how he found the strength to speak out despite his age and background. His response was simple but powerful, because someone has to. If I don't, who will? Samuel's growing reputation led to an opportunity to intern with a legal aid organization during his school vacations. Under the guidance of experienced lawyers, he learned about the intricacies of the legal system and how to navigate it to help those in need. One of the lawyers, Ms. Camila, took Samuel under her wing and encouraged him to think about the kind of lawyer he wanted to be. Justice isn't just about laws, she told him. It's about fairness, compassion, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Building bridges to his community. Despite his busy schedule, Samuel remained deeply connected to his neighborhood and the community that had supported him. Every weekend, he returned home to visit Dona Marta and to help at the community center he had helped establish after the trial. The center had grown significantly, now offering literacy programs, vocational training, and even basic legal advice for residents. Samuel often led workshops for young people, teaching them about their rights and how to stand up against discrimination. No imported suon pequeño sees ot suon grande, el problema, he would tell them. Siempre tienes el poder de luchar por lo que es correcto. One of his proudest moments came when a group of teenagers from the community center started their own initiative to clean up and beautify the neighborhood. Inspired by Samuel's example, they painted murals with messages of hope and justice on the walls of abandoned buildings. Esto es lo que significa el cambio, Samuel said as he watched them work. No es solo lo que hacemos por nosotros mismos, sino lo que hacemos por los demás. As Samuel approached the end of secondary school, he began to prepare for the next step in his journey, applying to law school. With the support of his teachers, mentors, and the foundation that had provided his scholarship, Samuel worked tirelessly to refine his application essays and prepare for entrance exams. His dream was to attend the University of Antioquia, one of the most prestigious institutions in Colombia, known for its strong law program. In his application essay, Samuel wrote about his experience in court and how it had shaped his desire to become a lawyer. Justice is not just a concept, he wrote. It's a responsibility. I want to dedicate my life to making sure that no one else has to face what I did, being judged not by the truth, but by their circumstances. Years of hard work, perseverance, and dedication had finally brought Samuel to the brink of realizing his dream. His journey from being a wrongly accused boy to a determined advocate for justice was coming full circle. Now, as he prepared to step into the world as a lawyer, Samuel carried with him the lessons and experiences that had shaped his life. Acceptance into law school. Samuel's tireless efforts paid off when he received an acceptance letter from the University of Antioquia, one of the most prestigious institutions in Colombia. The news was met with jubilation in his community. Neighbors, friends, and even people who had heard of Samuel's story but had never met him celebrated his achievement as if it were their own. Dona Marta, as always, was Samuel's biggest supporter. She held the letter in her hands, her eyes welling with tears. Siempre supe alegrías lejos, mi niño, she said, her voice trembling with pride. Samuel hugged her tightly, knowing that her unwavering belief in him had been the foundation of his journey. The transition to university life was challenging but exhilarating. The rigorous coursework and demanding schedule pushed Samuel to his limits, but he embraced every challenge with the same determination that had carried him through his trial. He quickly distinguished himself as a top student, excelling in classes on human rights, criminal law, and constitutional law, becoming an advocate for justice. As Samuel progressed through law school, he became deeply involved in initiatives that aligned with his passion for justice. He joined a student-led legal aid clinic, where he worked on cases from marginalized communities. Through this clinic, Samuel provided free legal assistance to individuals who had been wrongfully accused or faced systemic discrimination. One of his most memorable cases involved a young street vendor who had been unfairly fined and harassed by local authorities. Samuel's meticulous preparation and heartfelt advocacy led to the case being dismissed. The vendor, overwhelmed with gratitude, told him, "Gracias, Samuel. Eres un ángel para personas como yo." These words reinforce Samuel's commitment to using his legal expertise to uplift others. Samuel also participated in university-led outreach programs, traveling to underserved areas to educate people about their legal rights. During these visits, he often shared his own story, using it as an example of resilience and the importance of fighting for justice. His authenticity and relatability made him a powerful advocate, and his reputation grew beyond the walls of the university. Graduation and recognition. The day of Samuel's graduation was a moment of triumph not only for him, but also for everyone who had supported him along the way. Dressed in his cap and gown, Samuel walked across the stage to receive his degree in law, his heart pounding with a mix of pride and gratitude. The audience erupted into applause as his name was called, recognizing the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. Dona Marta sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her grandson achieve what once seemed impossible. "Este es solo el comienzo, mi niño," she whispered to herself, filled with hope for his future. Samuel's graduation was more than just a personal milestone. It was a symbol of what determination and community support could achieve. Local newspapers covered his story, celebrating him as an example of how individuals could rise above systemic barriers. From accused to advocate, Samuel's journey to justice was the headline of one article that captured the attention of readers across Medellin. Establishing his practice. After graduation, Samuel wasted no time putting his skills to work. He established a small law practice in his old neighborhood, focusing on cases involving human rights, wrongful accusations, and police misconduct. His office, modest but welcoming, quickly became a beacon of hope for the community. Samuel's first major case as a lawyer involved a teenager who had been arrested under circumstances similar to his own. The boy, accused of theft, faced a system that seemed ready to convict him without substantial evidence. Samuel took on the case with fervor, using his legal knowledge and personal experience to craft a compelling defense. In court, Samuel's arguments were passionate and precise, dismantling the prosecution's weak case piece by piece. When the judge declared the teenager not guilty, Samuel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He saw himself in the boy and knew that he had made a real difference. Over time, Samuel's practice expanded, and he began working on larger cases that challenged systemic injustices. He collaborated with human rights organizations, advocating for reforms in the judicial and policing systems to prevent the kind of abuses he had experienced as a child. Inspiring the next generation. Samuel's impact extended far beyond the courtroom. He remained deeply connected to his community, frequently returning to the center he had helped establish after his trial. There, he mentored young people, teaching them about their rights and encouraging them to dream big. "Your voice matters," he would tell them during workshops. "No matter where you come from or what you've been through, you have the power to make a difference." One of his proudest moments came when a group of young volunteers from the center decided to pursue careers in law and social work, inspired by Samuel's journey. Among them was Miguel, a boy Samuel had mentored since his early days at the center. "I want to be like you, Samuel," Miguel said one day. "I want to help people and fight for justice." Samuel smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You'll be even better than me, Miguel," he replied. "And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." A legacy of change. Samuel's story became a source of inspiration not just for his neighborhood, but for communities across Medellin and beyond. His advocacy work and his unwavering commitment to justice earned him recognition at the national level. He was invited to speak at conferences, where he shared his insights on reforming the judicial system and empowering marginalized communities. Despite his growing influence, Samuel remained humble and grounded. For him, success was not about accolades or recognition. It was about the lives he could change and the barriers he could help dismantle. One of Samuel's final and most impactful projects was leading an initiative to create a community-based legal aid network throughout Medellin. The network provided free legal support to underserved areas, ensuring that everyone had access to justice, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Samuel's vision for the network was clear. Justice should never be a privilege. It must be a right for all. Samuel's journey from an accused boy in a courtroom to a respected advocate for justice was one of resilience, courage, and transformation. Through his determination to fight for what was right, He not only changed his own life, but also created opportunities for countless others.